first 20 to 30 minutes of tonight's meeting, we will have our annual budget workshop, budget hearing, which is mandated prior to the budget vote, which will be May 21st. So unlike our budget workshops, and I'm just going to stand up and click through this presentation, so Board of Education members, you have this in front of you, but I believe you can make out on the screen as well. This is a public hearing, so if anyone is here strictly for the budget hearing, this is interactive. Therefore, if there are questions, if you have a question regarding a specific item, please feel free to ask. You don't have to wait, unlike budget workshops for work sessions for the board. This is a public meeting. When we're done and all questions have been answered, we are going to then continue on into the rest of our regular normal meeting. So again, please do not hesitate to ask questions if you are here for the budget hearing. And there will be an opportunity when we're done. If you have a question that comes up a little later on and you want to send us a note, you'll have an opportunity to do that as well. So if we can't answer all of them tonight, hopefully we'll answer them before the 21st. So I'm going to move a little closer. I apologize. I'm officially old. I can't see from far distances. In tonight, for the budget hearing, in session tonight, obviously I want to thank our Board of Education, our superintendent, myself, Jason Van Foss, and our assistant superintendent, and then our board clerk, Michelle Anders. Again, for those of you that are here live, obviously you can ask any questions you want. If you are streaming live, because we have streamed this live, those are that's the budget workshop email and my email that you can reach out to us specifically. Just a quick overview of budget development for 1920. We actually start in November, so this is a little bit of a misnomer. But from a board, we began the process in February all the way to April 23rd, where the budget was adopted. And then tonight is the budget hearing. And again, another reminder, May 21st from 11 to 8, you will have the option of voting on two propositions. One is to approve our budget for $53.5 million, which we're going to review tonight. There's also a second proposition, which is the purchasing of $438,515 worth of transportation vehicles, and you can see the breakout. And then also there will be the Board of Education election that you heard earlier on the Meet the Candidate night. So this is what you're voting for on the 21st. So for the development of 1920 budget, our objectives, and they may seem relatively simple, but as you may have heard earlier, with the ever-increasing difficulty of generating revenue, balancing budgets, and staying healthy is a challenge. So our objectives for this year was, and this really started last year, we wanted to keep our current staffing levels constant. We don't want to sawtooth year after year, hire some, reduce some, hire some, reduce some. We want to keep a constant level, which then signals a constant and consistent program. We want to obviously keep all of our student programs intact. We want to stay within the tax levy limit, and we want to maintain healthy fund balance and reserve levels. We're very glad to say we've met these objectives with this 1920 budget. So I want to get right into our revenue, and our revenue from year to year is up a little over $1 million. It's a 1.95% increase from the previous year. And you can note the different levels, the different items. Obviously the tax levy and our state aid are our two largest. They represent 96% of our overall total revenue. From the tax levy, which is the communities, and then from the state aid, which is obviously from the state. And just breaking out the other category, many times people want to know what is in the other category. This is just the details. These numbers have not changed since April 23rd. So if you have any questions on those, we'll be glad to answer them. Otherwise, we're going to move along. State aid, same thing. These numbers were finalized by April 1st when the state budget was in place. These numbers, we say expect. Obviously, at this point, this is what we can expect the state is going to deliver. And you'll note that it's up a little over almost $120,000 from year to year. Is that a zero? 110, I'm sorry. And the big decrease here, you'll note, is that
Building aid is down considerably. Building aid is what helps us pay for our mortgage when we go out and take a loan for capital improvements. So as our principal on our capital debt is coming down, so do state aid, building aid payments, and so that's the corresponding decrease. So that may look like a negative that we see less state aid, but it's only because we have less debt. So our three-part budget, the state requires us to break out our expenditures into three areas, and it's administrative, capital, and program. So I'm going to go through each area. You'll see year-to-year change, dollar and percent. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. So our first line, excuse me, is administrative. You'll note it represents about 10.4% of our overall budget. You'll see a slight increase of 3.7%, about $195,000. And you'll note contractual and and benefits, primarily health insurance, are the largest areas there. As well as finance, which is with CBO, which is our BOCES Central Business Office. Their expenses went up this year, and that's reflected in that line as well. Now on the capital side, you're seeing a significant decrease. I go back to what I had mentioned earlier. As we're paying our debt off and our principal payments are getting smaller, we're seeing that decrease. So that's actually a positive. It means we're paying off our debt greater than we're adding to it. And then under program, and this represents 70%, a little over 70% of our overall budget. So think 7 out of 10 cents or 70 cents out of every dollar is spent in program. And these are the major areas. And think, as you could think, all of our teaching programs, all of our related services, our special ed, our transportation, our co-curriculars, our athletics, all of those go into this portion of the budget. And this is where you want to see, and you're going to always see, the supermajority of our budget being spent. And that is an increase, as you can see, of over 4% from year to year. So when you take revenue and expenditures, and in New York State, public schools cannot run deficits. We can't borrow. We can't issue bonds. We have to balance our budget. So our budget is increasing 1.95% year to year. And as we had mentioned in the budget newsletter, it's under 2%, and it stays within the tax levy limit, so all of our taxpayers are going to be able to receive, if they receive, that property tax relief credit per New York State that has been in place now for several years. So this is our overall budget, and again, $53.5 million that we're asking you to consider and hopefully approve on May 21st. So the drivers, many times people say, so why is the budget going up over $1 million? And there are some specific areas. In particular, we have had some increased costs in our special ed lines, and if you've attended or listened to any of our previous budget workshops, you've noted that we've seen significant increase on our special ed side. Some of them unanticipated, some of them anticipated. So one of the decisions we made was to continue with our 811 program, and we knew based on staffing where we were going into 1920, it would require additional hiring. So you're seeing an additional teacher and additional aide to ensure that that program can stay. The other increases that we've noted are just increases, and special ed is one area that you really can't predict. There's volatility, there's transiency, there's student needs that develop that you need to obviously adjust and take care of, and that's where we're seeing in this particular budget. Next year's budget, we could see a $500,000 decrease from the year before. So this is just an area that's always going to be volatile to some degree, but obviously this year we're on the upside of it. Also, we have budgeted for an additional business teacher at the high school, which is actually an investment. We feel that the program is at a point where we have so many students demanding this coursework that our current teacher cannot handle the demand for the courses that we're trying to offer. So this is a real positive, assuming we can find a qualified person to hire. And then the other areas, collective bargaining agreements, we are negotiating 4 contracts. 2 are currently successfully negotiated, and then 2 more we are negotiating. We're in the process. We have to build in, obviously, anticipated increases for that. And then the remaining items, we've had some increases in other areas that we've had to adjust for, as you'll see, some rental of music agreements, some service agreements, And then adjustment, and what we mean there is you budget based on what you think you're going to spend, and you watch over time and you realize that, geez, we keep budgeting less than what we're actually spending. We need to adjust that moving forward. That's what we mean by adjustments to actuals. And then the last item is health insurance. While we're seeing some breakthrough and seeing some of those costs starting to stabilize, they're still going up for this particular year. So overall, if someone was to say, why is the budget going up? There's your snapshot, and we can break out into each line item in particular, but that's the driver for 1920. So what happens if our budget is defeated? And this question has to come up because it's a real possibility. We have to ask the community to approve our budget. And so thankfully, if you stay at or below your tax levy limit, you simply need a 50.1 approval. If you seek an override of the tax levy, it's 60%. But you have to plan as if the budget could be defeated. So what's in place is what's called a contingency budget. And the Board of Education has three options. The first two are really the only realistic option, and I'll explain that. But if the budget was to be defeated on May 21st, and what do we mean by defeated? Less than 50% vote yes. That's defeat. We would have to make the decision, the board would have to make the decision of either adopting a contingency budget immediately, and I'll explain what that would incur, or making some changes and going back out to the voters in 30 days with an amended budget and another vote. So the third option, and what makes this a little rare, is that if the budget was defeated, but let's say that we made the decision, we're going to make reductions to our co-curriculars. We're going to eliminate all clubs and activities to reduce our budget to hopefully get it passed. We could add all co-curriculars as a separate proposition that the voters could then go and vote for separately. Again, it's an option, it's rare, it's not used very often, but when you're looking at C, just as an example of what does that mean, that would be an example of using that particular possibility. Our focus has been on looking at A or B. But I mentioned that, and I'll get to why we feel confident in just those two options. Here's the cost of a contingency budget. So contingency budget basically says if your voters disapprove your budget and you go to a contingency, then the tax levy increase has to be zero. So what do we mean? For this school year, the tax levy increase is 1.86%. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. In a contingency budget, it has to be zero. So we would have to reduce our budget by $444,000 in order to fall under the contingency budget. And you can do that either through using more of your savings and reserves or decreasing your spending. But by law, you have to show what that would look like if you were using just the expenditure side. So this is a formula that we would have to use to go back into our three-part budget and make reductions to get to that $444,000. So this is not something we want to obviously have to deal with. These are direct programs. Students are going to be impacted, staff would be impacted, the district would be impacted. But we have to show voters what a contingency budget would end up costing or looking like. Now, I mention that because, and I know this is small and I apologize, this district has had significant approval ratings and community support for years and years and years. And so I've only highlighted to the right the last 8 years. So that doesn't mean we ever want to go into a budget thinking, oh, hey, no, we've got this. We don't have to worry about anything. The voters are just going to approve it. We don't believe that. That's why we try to be fiscally responsible. We try to balance needs. We try to make sure we're healthy because we want to see that trend continue. We'd love to see 70+% voter approval every year. And I think our community supports what we do here. So again, I think we want to make sure that we continue that support in that respect. Now, just as a little historical note, this is 2006. That's a defeated budget. So if you go back, it's been a few years, but it can happen. And again, when your budget's defeated, it's a difficult process to have to go through to figure out how you're going to get community support moving forward. So again, I think we can feel very confident in that our community supports us, but we never can get overconfident because you never know. So final recommendations, and this is what we've given the board, and now obviously the community, for the 1920 budget. So our first recommendation is the board adopted a $53.5 million spending plan. That's our spending plan for this year. That's what we're asking folks to approve. And all of those items we've just reviewed are in there. Number two, the board policy asks and really dictates fiscal and financial stability and health. Board policy 3910 asks that we can stay at 4% of unallocated fund balance, meaning at the end of the day, we can have up to 4% of our total budget unspent to roll over into the following year. And many times people will say, geez, that's a lot of money. Well, there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of variabilities that come up in a given year. As I mentioned, special education being one where you need to have money on hand. And if you're allowed to have 4%, our board policy says we should shoot for 4% every time possible, sign of fiscal health. So that's recommendation number two. And we put this in here last year because we had to make some decisions last year to maintain financial health. And people say, well, if you're making reductions to spending, but you're saying you're doing it to stay healthy, explain to me how it's healthy. Well, if you spend your money every year and you never have the ability to have extra left over and think of your own budgets, it's hard to save and it's hard to be able to make decisions when an emergency arises. So the reality is, when you look at the state comptroller's office, when they come and do an audit of your finances, one of the areas they focus on specifically is, do you have money set aside? Do you have savings? If something happens, can you afford to deal with it? So having savings is not holding on to money just to hoard it and to create, a surplus for the sake of having a surplus. It's financially healthy, and that's what the board has tried to do, and that's what the policy 3910 really is trying to accomplish. The third recommendation, and so for every year of the tax levy law, and I'll show you the graphic, it's been in existence now for, I think, 9 years. We have stayed at or below the tax levy limit, which means we've never asked the community to go over the tax levy limit and to seek that 60%. And just to give you a graphic, and again, if you're interested, Jeff and I will gladly do an hour seminar on how to follow and calculate the tax levy limit. It's a really incredibly interesting and engaging formula. It looks something like this, and we'll throw some numbers in there, and it's really interesting. But at the end of the day, it's the formula that we have to submit to the state. The state runs the formula, and they hand back to us, here's what your tax levy limit is. So we do not dictate necessarily what the calculation is. We can simply say whether we want to go over that amount or not. And so for this year, our recommendation has been to stay at the levy limit. We're not asking you to go over. And again, the tax levy limit is 1.86 or an additional $444,000 from the previous year. That's how much more we're asking the local community to give additionally. And it's still a lot of money, but that's the dollar-to-dollar increase. And then this is a breakout of where it comes from because there are multiple variables in that equation. And then this is a small graphic, and I apologize. I think I'm going to start weeding off some of these outer years, but it just goes to show you that's from 2000, is that 8, 9? Till today. And the tax levy law has been in effect now, you can see these years, 8 years. So the reason I put this graphic up is this is the formula that we are bound to follow each year. It isn't the board saying, well, this year we're going to ask for 2.5, and this year we're going to ask for 0.89. We get the formula, we get the calculation, we go out to the community. The issue is, and you'll know, there's been some lean years. That's a 0.89. That's a lean year. Without the ability to go out and ask for more money, we have to make do with the money we get. And again, all those factors and drivers that we had mentioned earlier, they exist pretty much every year, with the exception of special ed this year being a little higher than normal. So the new normal is we have to try to make expenditures work within this tax levy limit law. And there's real reasons why we need to follow that. And this is just graphically to show you what it's looked like. So, this was a high year, but again, formula driven. That isn't Maine-Endwell saying, let's go out at 5.94. That's what the formula drove. And you'll note from there, though, we're starting to have a little bit of increase. But bottom line is that's 48% of our revenue driven by that percentage each year. And so people typically will say, so what does that do to me? So we use a $100,000 home in the town of Union. Why? Because the town of Union represents 75% of our overall population base. $100,000 is a relatively median house value. And so using Basic Star, it's about a $54 increase for a home in the town of Union valued at $100,000. So obviously higher valued home, it's going to be higher. Less valued home, it's going to be lower, but we use that number as a gauge as to what does really 1.86 mean. And then same thing with Enhanced Star, and again, a very modest dollar for dollar increase using $100,000 home town union. And this is an area, and I would say at our budget workshop in March, Cynthia Wombold from CBO had mentioned that there's some changes to Star. Maybe you're aware of it, maybe you're not. But there is now a new emphasis on moving to a credit versus getting a reduction off your bill. And we have requested that our community, if they're interested in learning more about that, reach out to this. This is the website that can explain it more in detail. That's not something the school controls, so we try not to step into promoting those conversations because, again, it's not in our purview. But that is a new change that's come into effect, and you will see that coming over the next couple years. You may want to familiar yourself with that in the coming years. And then our final recommendation is that Proposition 2, which is to continue with our bus replacement cycle. And the reason why we do that is if we let buses go too long, and then in one particular year we have 7 to 8 to 10 buses that need to be replaced, the cost is significantly more than if we simply keep updating each year and we take our oldest and we replace it with our newest and we just keep cycling through so that we never have vehicles that are significantly old and obviously not only bound for potential disrepair, but they're expensive to maintain. So again, we've asked our community to continue with this bus replacement plan. So that is our budget hearing, and at this point, we will certainly go back and answer any questions. However, I would ask if you want to go back, this is recorded, it's on our website, you'll be able to watch it. There's a dedicated email. You can call myself, our assistant superintendent. Obviously, reach out to a board member with any questions regarding specifics, and we will get the information to you, I promise, within a 24-hour turnaround. So do not be afraid to ask any questions if you have them. But at this point, this concludes our budget hearing unless there are questions that we will answer. So I will turn it over to the community if there are questions.
You mentioned, I'm not sure if I heard how much aid we get back on those buses.
Oh, so with the bus replacement, we get anywhere from 82 to 86%, depending on the calculation. So a $100,000 bus with aid ends up costing us about $12,000 to $14,000, amortized over 5 years. And then also subtract out whatever trade-in value we get from the buses that we're actually selling, because we sell them and we get scrap value or trade-in value. So it's probably one of our best investments we can make financially. The state is incentivizing us to keep our buses new. So again, that's why we support it every year. And actually, our bus replacement proposition sometimes has a higher success rate or yes rate than our overall budget. We think that's just good education on our part. Yep. Any other questions? Well, if you have them between now and the 21st, please do not hesitate at all to reach out. You should all have received your budget newsletter, and hopefully you will watch this again if you have any questions and reach out to us. So again, I want to thank everyone for coming. If you did come for our budget hearing, and ladies and gentlemen of the board, that concludes our budget hearing.